Leslie, thank you so much for meeting with me and for being open to having a conversation with me about the Soulbox project. So, to start off, can you tell me a little bit about what the project entails and why it came to be?
Sure. Um, this is something that I started right after the Las Vegas shooting in 2017. I remember seeing that story come onto my phone that morning, and I swiped it away really quickly. It was like, oh, yuck, I do not want to see that. Another mass shooting. There was all kinds of other, you know, pressing things going on. And then it wasn't until later in the day when I actually found out what had happened that I thought, this is never going to change, because if everybody swipes it away like I did, we're not going to acknowledge what's really happening. And um, so as an artist, I started thinking, how big is this? What's happening? And I went and looked at statistics on gunviolencearchive.org, which is where we get where this project gets all its statistics. Um, and I was just appalled. I mean, I had no idea. And the numbers were so huge. I'm like, well, no wonder people aren't reacting to this. Our brains are not wired for that. We're to have all those zeros behind a number that's indicating um, human lives. And as an artist, I thought, this issue needs a visual. There's nothing to connect those numbers to at this point. And so I just thought, what could we use, to hold space for each one of these lives, and then pile them up so that people could see, how much this really is. And so I landed on these little origami boxes, which I had learned to fold, not too much earlier than this. And because I knew it wanted to be something that was really easy to make, that anybody from 70 up could make. And I'm not 77 is what I meant to say. And that was lightweight, easy to send around. And then I that from that little box to Soulbox was just a real short jump. I just decided that's what they were going to be called. Put up a website, asked, told people what I was doing, and started to collect these boxes. And I have to say that, almost 6 years later, I am astounded at the reception, at what actually happened as a result of that. As you know, because I'm assuming that you've looked all over our website, we took 200,000 of these things to the National Mall in 2021. And that was a goal to get on the mall. And our assumption, which turned out to be erroneous, was that once we made this big national splash, that that people would want, organizations, venues would want to exhibit as well. As it turns out, the rising costs in shipping just made that impossible. I mean, the places that wanted to exhibit these things, because unfortunately, because they're lightweight doesn't mean that they cost less to ship. Because as soon as you get over a certain volume, then it's by volume. So So as a, as a result, we were sitting on 200,000 boxes here in Portland, Oregon, trying to figure out what was the best way to keep it going. And we decided to literally give the project away. And so that's what has happened now, is that all the panels like this one that's hanging behind me, they've all been distributed around the country to different groups and organizations who are working on this issue and can use this kind of a visual. And they're all, they're all distributed now. So we have all these branches of the Soulbox project all over, 53 of them now, I think, in 23 different states. And so that enabled me to step back, which I promised myself I would do by the time I was 75, which happened this month. And so I, I was able to make that part happen. But I'm not including here your real question, which is how has this helped with trauma? And you can ask me specific questions about that if you want, but I can just say off the top that I initially was just going for the numbers. I was just going for trying to get people to understand how many, and therefore have an emotional reaction that would stir action. And I didn't know, because I personally don't know anybody who's been killed or injured by a gun. And I didn't know how meaningful this project was going to be to people. And it's just touched so many who were able to finally, use their hands, use their creativity, make a little memorial, and then have that little thing that they had made be part of this great big thing to call attention to these tragedies. And it's it's a really important piece that I think is still missing from dealing with these kinds of traumas, is to have something to do that's physical, that actually manifests into something that you can hold in your hand. I don't know if you watched that. We've only got a couple of stories up on our website, but both of them are worth watching, I think, as far as trauma relief is concerned.
Yeah, and it's so I've noticed that art becomes very easy to kind of put all of your emotions in, versus having talk therapy. With talk therapy, you're entrusting all of your secrets or all of your feelings on another individual. And
Right.
with Soulbox, you're able to craft your emotions yourself. But I can only assume that taking on a project like this comes with some sort of burden for you as well. Just seeing the overwhelming impact that it has over 200,000 people, and that's just a fraction of the gun violence.
It's a tiny fraction. I mean, what we exhibited on the mall at that time was less than 3 years. It was like two and 2.5 years or something like that, that 200,000 represented. It's, much larger than that now. And it's interesting, you're talking about talk therapy, making soul boxes in a group, which is what happened a lot. Engenders talk therapy amongst the participants, but in a very different way, because you're busy doing something with your hands and you don't have to be looking somebody else in the eye. It's kind of like what my daughter has always referred to as windshield time, which is, any parent with a teenager knows, that if you really want to talk to your kid, take a really long drive, where you can, talk side by side, but not have to, you know, not have to look at each other. And and I think that's something that's overlooked and is really powerful, that people are able to share their stories and let their grief come out, in what feels like a safe environment, and to have something beautiful at the end, you know,
And
that counts for a lot.
it sure does. Yes, and I can
Yeah.
see the beautiful boxes behind you. Uh,
Mhm.
it it's very impactful just to see the small amount that you have there. How many souls we have lost to gunfire, and these are from events that are by mistake, injuries, suicide, not just mass shootings. Uh,
Right.
how who do the boxes represent? Is it specifically for those who were killed by gunfire? Is it for victims, injuries?
The suicides are over half, not in every state, um, but in most states, suicides are over half of the gunfire fatalities. And that's one of the reasons why our project says gunfire instead of gun violence, because I mean, gun violence brings up something that somebody does to somebody else. It's a violent act. And as you say, some of these things are accidents, not that many, and then some are defense. Um, uh, but so many are suicides, and the families of people who have taken their own lives, for the most part, don't think of that as a violent act. Um, of course it is. I mean, anything that happens with a gun is violent, but it's the intent, it's the thought behind it. So, um, now that I wanted to make that point, I'm missing your question. I'm sorry. Can you go back and ask me again?
So who do the boxes represent?
Oh, right. Okay. So, yeah, these are for um, victims of gunfire, meaning anybody who has been killed or injured. So it doesn't include all the collateral damage, which is huge. Obviously, one death radiates out and out and out and out as far as the people who are affected. And when we're writing about the Soulbox Project, we often have to correct ourselves in saying, these boxes represent those affected by gunfire, because they don't even begin to do that. So the boxes oftentimes have names on them of individuals who have been killed or injured, and then others have messages on them. Uh, some of them are messages of anger, and some are of hope and love. Some of them are just lovely boxes, and they still hold space for the unknowns. There's especially for suicides, because we used to, when we were going for this 200,000 goal, we would send lists of victims to organizations that were making soul boxes, and that ended up being a really educational thing for a lot of people, because they would have a list of names, and if they took the time, and a lot of them did take the time to look up the obituaries or look up the stories that go with those names, it was a huge education for the people who were making those boxes. Because a lot of the boxes were made by people like me, mostly older women, a lot of them who have the time and the resources to get involved in something like this, and but who also have carried the angst that the whole country carries around this. You know, even though it doesn't affect you personally on a one-to-one basis, it affects you personally in your heart, because you know that this is just so wrong. And so to be able to make a bunch of boxes and participate in this project was very healing for people who weren't directly affected, but still carried this underlying national trauma. So I keep going off on these little tangents, and I'm sorry. Uh,
Love to
so,
hear.
but one of the things that was important to me at the very beginning of this was that we include the injured, because there are so many injured, and some of them graze, and some of them paralyzed and in a wheelchair for the rest of their lives. These people need to be counted. I mean, they are victims of this. And then, of course, there's all the PTSD and all of it that goes along, you know, also that isn't really included in this particular project, again, because it's just so overwhelmingly huge. So we have always said, basically anybody who's taken a bullet is who these represent.
You mentioned something very important that got me, and you said that this has been healing even for people who haven't personally experienced or know anyone who experienced this. So how, with your relationship with art and, you know, the project, I assume became bigger than what you expected. Um,
Yes.
how has this been healing for you in a way?
Well, it's been a huge education for me. And I think the healing part of it, I'm not sure that healing is quite the right word for me personally. But as an artist, I have always wanted to make art that was of some social significance, and that would matter in some way. And I can paint a painting that's got a lot of that in it, and you know, it might be seen by, I don't know, a couple of hundred people over its lifetime. Whereas starting something like this that involves other people and their emotions and their need, it became a much more meaningful project for me, in that I could see how much it meant to them. And so it's not so much that I needed to heal from this particular trauma. I needed to do something about the shock of that mass shooting, and then finding out that the mass shootings are less than 1%, and suicides are over 50%. And I'm just thinking, that's something we can do something about, you know? I mean, so much energy is going into legislation about guns and gun control. What we have been trying to do with this project is to reach individuals on a heart-to-heart level, where they would just get it. It's like, I don't want to be part of this huge, awful problem. I am going to lock up my guns. I am going to talk to my kids about anger management. I am going to ask my gun club to have another safety class. I am going to go right to my legislator. I mean, I'm not saying that legislation isn't valuable. It is, but there are over 400 million guns in this country already. So it's a good idea to stop them, more of them coming in. But they're out there already, and people have to make individual decisions about how they're used. And so, that's what we were going for, is that that aha, that realization that having a gun around is playing with fire. There's just no question about it.
Right. And according to the Gun Violence Archive, which is what you
Mhm.
um, there's been 45,000 deaths to gun violence, nearly 40,000 injuries in just 2022. Um,
Right.
so in the last 72 hours, there's been over 320 reported gun violence incidents. So what do you think needs to be done um, to
Mm.
decrease the rising numbers in gun violence?
I wish I could answer that. I'm actually looking at our website right now. We updated it on August 6th, and on August 6th, it was 48,735 so far this year. I mean, that's an astounding number. It's an epidemic. Honestly, what I feel, um, this project very much parallels the AIDS quilt. And you are young enough that you may you may not even know that much about the AIDS quilt, but it is still going to this day. There are still people making quilts for AIDS victims, and they're still being exhibited. And what happened with the AIDS quilt, and there's a blog on our website about this if you're interested in it, that explains the parallels between these two things. Um, but there became an awareness of AIDS, and also simultaneously an awareness of the community that it was most affecting, the LGBTQ communities, and an understanding developed out of all of that, how how that disease could be approached. There was money put into research, which developed, uh, things that were able to help, so that the death rate of um, deaths from AIDS plummeted, really. And the HIV is still just keeps going up and up and up. And so when I look at a chart like that, I'm thinking that HIV going up and up and up is just like the number of guns in this country. It just keeps going up and up and up and up. And our challenge is, how do we figure out how to make the deaths and injuries from those guns go down? I think it has to do with education and community, which we're so in need of now, in where things have become so divisive, so us and them. um the fear that has been engendered by that, which is um causing more people to purchase guns than ever before. I mean, during the pandemic, gun sales just skyrocketed, often by people who have never owned a gun before, probably don't even know how to use the thing properly, certainly don't, I may not be storing them the way they should be. And with this illusion, this myth that they're going to be safer if they have a gun than not. And that myth has to be busted somehow. Um, and I also have to say, and I guess this goes back to legislation, but it could also go to and now I'm thinking out loud, so don't I don't know if you want to quote me on this, but I'm just thinking, I mean, if there were if the nation got pissed enough at the gun manufacturers and started boycotting their product, that would really do a lot, I mean, I'm appalled, absolutely appalled at what the gun manufacturers get away with. What I mean, they're not allowed to be sued. They run outrageous advertising targeted to young people. They're even making assault weapons now that are smaller size so that your child can learn how to use one, I mean, just Lordy. So I have no illusions that something like, the Soulbox project is going to make these numbers go down. It's going to take something obviously much bigger than that. But my hope is that they play a part, that they do offer some solace to people who are suffering, and that they do offer some hope, that this beautiful accounting of lives does touch hearts enough to make people want to address the issue in all the different ways that it needs to be addressed.
Right, and you've partnered already with over 23 companies or organizations within.
Oh yeah, there's on our website there are there's a list of our branches, and they are the groups and organizations that stepped up and said, yes, we want we want some of your project, and we sent it to them. So there's several Moms Demand Action chapters that are involved and have loved our project from the very beginning. Moms Demand has been very receptive to the Soulbox project. Everytown USA, which is the umbrella over Moms Demand Action, has not embraced this project, but it's just because they're a huge bureaucracy. They've got too much else going on. But those individual chapters have realized the power of this, and it's giving them something that they can do other than, sit in with lawmakers and make their what am I trying to say here? Sit in with lawmakers and make their point, so yeah, so it's, I mean, churches are also really embrace this project. They're already nonpartisan, and non-political, and we have tried to stay, and I think successfully have stayed non-political through this whole thing, which I felt from the beginning was really important, because this is not an us and them thing. And grief is grief. It affects everybody, whether you're pro-gun or no gun. And to make a division there would be to alienate probably the people who most need this project. So we've been very careful to stay out of politics. We don't lobby, we don't do petitions, we don't do any of that kind of thing. We make art. We show people how to make art and use it as a tool for activism.
How can you encourage people to maybe start their own branch with Soul Shot, or even just give it a try for themselves. Maybe someone who feels like they don't know how to do art. Um,
Right.
I've heard many
I,
people say, I can't draw a line. So
you just said Soul Shot, which was your,
those,
and that's okay. That's okay. I totally know about Soul Shot, and Soul Shot is a great organization. You know, and then they're very, uh, I mean, you do have to be an artist to be involved in that. What we're getting across to people is that nobody needs to be an artist to do this. No, it's not even so much the art that goes on it as it is the folding. You would appreciate watching the interview with Andrew, and that is a man who lost his son to suicide, and he's talking about how reluctant he was to make a soul box. I mean, it just seemed ludicrous to him. And I can understand this totally. You know, it's like, what? I'm supposed to make this little paper box and it's supposed to make me feel better about the fact that my son is dead. You know, I mean, that's a very legitimate response. And he was impressed by the numbers of them that he saw, and didn't feel so alone when he was surrounded by all of these others that had been made. And then when we finally got him to sit down and make a box, you know, following along step by step, fold by fold, and he realized that for the first time, after seeing counselors, lawyers, you know, religious leaders, all these places where he had gone to find some solace, it was folding that paper exactly the way he was being shown how to do it, step by step by step, that finally got his brain to disconnect from the pain that he was feeling. And he talks about this very eloquently in this interview. So that's, I mean, that's what these different branches are doing, is that they're offering this opportunity, and they can do it more effectively from all those, you know, 53 different places than we can here from in Portland. And anybody can get involved. I mean, this is an ongoing thing. And so I know my colleague Carla is talking to somebody right now on another Zoom call who wants to start a branch. She's also a mom who has lost a young son, I think a 5-year-old. Ooh, and is, you know, is looking to activate. And so um, I mean, it's such a simple concept. And, you know, I mean, anybody can do this. You know, it's just two pieces of 8x8 paper, or 8.5 by 8.5 paper. And then, you know, we're encouraging people to make these display panels the same way that we've made them. Because I have this fantasy that someday somebody's going to say, we should bring these all together again. And that, you know, they'll have the energy and the resources and the whatever to do that. And then to get a hold of all these branches and say, hey, you know, send us your panels and we'll display them all together and then send them back to you. If they're all made the same way, they'll all fit together and it'll make it much easier and more effective. So there's videos on our site, you know, telling people how they can make their panels. And but what people do with this is really up to them. So it can be it can focus on getting people together to fold these, either for their own grief or for the grief of others, which is often what churches do. And then if they get enough of them, you know, they can also, on our exhibits and events tab down at the very bottom, there's past highlights. and you'll see lots of different ways that people have used these boxes, not just on the panels, but also carrying them in backpacks for marches or whatever, or simply piling them up, in a display window in a library or a church or whatever. I used to think it would take, thousands of them to make an impact. It doesn't. There's 98 on a panel, and a panel in itself is just really powerful when people stop and look. So it's not so much that you have to have thousands and thousands of them to make an exhibit. You can make an exhibit with whatever you have, and then encourage your community to add to it. And it's interesting, when we put together these panels, I realized early on that they shouldn't be all names, because if they were, people would walk up to them and look at the one or two and just be so overwhelmed they would not look further. And so the fact that the names are interspersed with the artwork and the and just the beautiful boxes. I was gonna let me grab something real quick. I don't know that this is going to be the best example. But you can see there's all kinds of interesting stuff
Beautiful.
that people have put on here. Here's a little quote from Elizabeth Warren. This is actually this one actually doesn't have a person on it. This is a sample, that I've taken around to show to people how these things work, because every box is sewn on individually.
Wow.
With dental floss.
Really?
Yes.
It's very inventive. I love that.
Well, it needed to be something really thin, but also very strong. And, they're wax coated. And so using the string to, tie and whatever, it works really well. And will last forever, really. The Egyptian tombs have things in them that are coming, wax that have been around forever. So yeah, so they're on these panels, and all this stuff is on the website, how to do this. But it's the beauty of it, and the interest of it, and going along and seeing a victim, and here's a young Black man, and here's a 5-year-old who found a gun and shot himself, and here's a woman from domestic violence and whatever. But in between all of them are these things to think about, things to look at. And that keeps people wandering through. And when we exhibited these on the mall, we had 800 linear feet to look at, because the mall is 200 feet wide. We did it, crosswise. And there were 2 rows back to back that you could walk down. So 800 feet altogether. And people came to see it. People came to see it from publicity, but people who didn't know anything about it, just walking down the mall and seeing all this color and all of were attracted to it. And then they would come in thinking, I'm sure, that they were going to, spend a couple of minutes seeing what this was. And they would just stay and look and look and look and go on and on. The phrase hearts and minds, it's significant that hearts comes before minds, because that's the way it works. If you want to make something happen, you have to you have to come through the heart before you get to the brain, because the brain will come up with all kinds of rationalizations. Your heart is where the compassion and the true understanding happens. So that's what we're trying to do. And you know, this project may ebb and flow. What I have felt by giving these things away is that if they, you know, if these branches have these things and they don't do anything with them for a while, that's okay. You know, I mean, it'll come and go as people have the time and the energy for it. But there, you know, as long as the rodents don't get them or mildew, they'll last for a very, very long time. I'm amazed at how well these panels have held up in the 6 years that we've, you know, been handling them and you know, sending them around the country. Um, and so I have hope that uh, that there will be groups and individuals who will see the value of this, and we've done all the legwork. You know, we've figured out all the mechanics and engineering and all of that of the whole project, and what they really need to do is just take it and offer it to those who feel like they could do something with it.
So I'd like to thank you for your time, Leslie. It was wonderful getting to know you and getting to